freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same. And if you and I don't do this, then you and I may well spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it once was like in America when men were free.
Welcome back, everyone, to Patriot Coalition Live. I'm Matthew Nugent.
And I'm Jason Mrochek.
Thanks for joining us today. Our goal is to create a timeless resource to teach about the Constitution and the proper role of government, the importance of America's Judeo-Christian heritage, and how to defend against threats to our republic. Folks, we want to engage members of our armed forces, first responders, and the patriots who support them in their noble professions. Also, your support is important to us. Please support us at patriotcoalitionlive.com/support. Weekly episodes are available Tuesday mornings at places like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and iHeartRadio, or you can find us at patriotcoalitionlive.com. If you'd like to see this podcast, you can see us at patriotcoalitionlive.com or at rumble.com, rumble.com, the uncensored alternative to YouTube. Okay, y'all ready?
Yes.
Let's do this. Okay, the title of today's episode is The Birth of a Great Nation and Embracing Liberty, the Declaration of Independence. This is part 3 of 3, which is episode 13.
So if you guys have been following along for the last few episodes, you'll know that we're digging pretty deep into the Declaration of Independence. It's, as I understand, not a lot of people maybe have read through the entire Declaration of Independence, not just maybe the preamble, which is often quoted, or maybe even the second paragraph, which is also sometimes quoted, but all the grievances, all the things that caused, impelled us to our separation. So some of the key things that we're going to talk about, we have talked about, right? That the Declaration of Independence does lay out the principles of liberty, not just for our nation, but the principles of liberty in terms of the laws of nature. And they're very well articulated in that second paragraph. The Declaration of Independence also gives us our justification, not just to our brethren, or back then, our brethren in Great Britain, but to the rest of the world. We felt it was important that if we're going to defend this newfound independence, that we needed to tell them exactly why we were doing it. It wasn't for light and transient causes, as it says. And then we do the founders also list 27 grievances. It wasn't just like, oh yeah, we didn't really like that one time you did this thing. It was 27 different grievances that were very specific about what was going on at the time. And then it also conveyed their readiness, right? The fact that how angry they were at the amount of tyranny that was being perpetrated upon them at that time. So where we are, again, this is episode part 3 of 3 in this episode on the Declaration of Independence, and we are picking up at grievance number 13 in the list of grievances. So the 13th grievance, if you're following along, again, this is if you've got your Declaration of Independence handy and you're not driving, obviously, pick it up and follow along so you can see exactly what our founders wrote. So grievance number 13 in the Declaration of Independence says, he has combined with others. So real quick, remember, he in all these grievances refers to the King of England. So King George III. He has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation. So this isn't the first time we'll see this word pretended. And just for context, when it says he has combined with others, the others he's combining with is the Parliament. So you've got the Parliament, which is their lawmaking body, and the King, which is their kind of their president, their executive authority. So they're alleging, and they're right, that he, the King, is combining with legislature to subject us to a jurisdiction that has no authority over us. He's colluding with Parliament to make believe, if you will, that the colonies were governed by Parliament and not by their own colonial legislatures, which is a violation of the principles of government, that that people derive their powers, or the governments rather derive their powers from the consent of the governed. Well, if we didn't consent to the law or to the parliament and who is elected there, and the laws are there, then those laws have no authority over us in accordance with the laws of nature. So that's yeah, go ahead.
And if you don't have your own laws and another body or entity or country, in this case, the parliament and the king, what can they do in your country? And the answer is anything that they want.
Yeah, you'll see that. I mean, you probably remember, but this is a theme throughout the document, is this reference to, pretended legislation, another legislature, a parliament doing something that is not their authority to do. Okay. So the next grievance, number 14. For quartering. So, that's one of the things. So the last grievance that I just read, it talks about the pretended legislation. It is kind of a header, if you will, to several acts of legislation that the parliament passed, not in accordance with the colony's wishes. So the next, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The next, let's see, 6, 7, 8, 9. I think there's nine acts that they talk about that are going to that are passed by Parliament that are enacted on the colonies. So starting with the first one, for quartering, as in like a quarter, but to quarter a troop somewhere, for quartering large bodies of armed troops among us. So this one is pretty self-explanatory, but Parliament authorized illegally British troops to have the ability to stay in homes, private taverns, at the expense of the owner. So they weren't paying for it. Not only were they not paying for it, but now they are putting troops in private residences and establishments from which they can kind of rain their terror, not terror, but maybe terror and tyranny upon us, right?
Yeah. Now, notice it didn't say a few soldiers. It said large bodies. Now, it's like, now imagine 20,000 troops coming into town. And back then, a town was maybe a few thousand people. So there literally could have been as many soldiers as town members or even more. Think about that, eating you out of house of home. And if you fight, as we've seen on previous grievances, they could harm you, even kill you, and not have any redress for it. And they could actually get away from it. So if
now you're paying for the privilege of having these people to do these things to you.
Yeah. And here's a theme you will see again. A lot of the tyranny we experience, and here's another teaser, folks, and this is important. A lot of 3 of the sources of power, I'm going off script, Jason, are media, big tech, and money. And the people who have been using those have been getting those from us because we've empowered them to do so. That's coming up. And here, like Jason said, we are paying, meaning being taxed, for the privilege of being put under the force and pseudo laws of a tyrant.
Yeah, and it's not even a direct tax. It's almost an indirect tax because we're having to just basically pay for their sustenance.
And imagine if it's during the winter, they're not going to stay for a couple days. Imagine having, massive bodies of soldiers, armed soldiers, staying in your house for a whole winter.
Yeah. Yep.
An indirect tax.
So the next act that they are saying that are pretended acts of legislation is for protecting them, meaning these troops, by a mock trial from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states. So this is referring to, at the time, what was known as the Administration of Justice Act, which allowed the Crown officials or any of his officers that are accused of a capital crime to be tried either in other colonies or back in Britain, so that a jury of the victim's peers, as we would know it today, would not be present to render their judgment on these murderers. So they're
If I could,
essentially, yeah,
I
they're
could say something
essentially.
here.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Jason and I have talked about how the left, which are basically a form of tyranny, socialist, they are great at words and twisting words. This is the first time I've seen in history, at least involving the United States, of someone twisting the words, because Administration of Justice Act, it's
What
it's
justice
not
is that?
that's not, it's like the Freedom Act, or the Equality Act. It's not. It's a form of tyranny. So we have to be thinking patriots. We have to be discerning patriots. And here, Jason, I don't know if you know of another example. You would probably know better than I would about this, but the Administration of Justice Act. It's not the Administration of Justice Acts. It's the Allowance of Tyranny Edict. So, which is
It allows their reigns of terror with impunity. I mean, it's essentially kind of a wink and a nod saying, oh yeah, we'll try them. We'll just try them somewhere else where, the people who are affected by it don't get to have a chance to sit on the jury. So
that's right.
Moving on to the next pretended act, as they called them, for cutting off our trade with all parts of the world. So this actually refers to the response to the Boston Tea Party. So Parliament passed what's known as the Boston Port Act, which basically closed down Boston Harbor until the East India Company, the ones that had the monopoly on the tea trade, which we were rejecting, which we rejected and were protesting against, until they were paid back for the losses they incurred in the Boston Tea Party. So they basically closed off the whole port of Boston. Now, if you can imagine, Boston was a seafaring community, right? I mean, that's where they were able to, it was a major hub of trade, and they closed that off. So again, imagine today, a tyrant saying, oh no, Mr. Barber or Mr. Restaurant, you can't be open until I allow you to be open.
I'm telling you, I'm just fired up about this. A lot of battles, tyranny is not with bullets. Okay. It's not kinetic.
Great point.
I'm telling you. And Jason, you got me started on this, man. You just mentioned it, but hey,
preach it, brother. Preach it.
The fact is that what is the bleep is going on right now is a form of tyranny. And the fact is it was done under the guise of fear. And a lot of us, including the churches in 2020, we're like, okay, we're a little afraid too. Common sense. We're thinking maybe a few weeks just to stop the, flatten the curve. And now we hear, and it's early January 2021, that, and I mentioned this before to you, Jason. I think I mentioned it on an episode or on the podcast, but wait till you hear a second strain of COVID. Don't be fooled, people. Do not be fooled. Okay.
I'm reining you in now, brother. I'm reining you in.
Okay. We'll talk about that another episode. Okay. All right.
Yeah, no, but he's exactly right, gang. This is punishing many for the crimes or offenses of a few, right? Which, to Matt's point, I mean, and to the point I just made, today that's like saying, okay, just because something bad is happening, we're going to punish everybody. So that's for cutting off trade with all the parts of the world. The next pretended law that Parliament passed, and again, these are pretended because Parliament had no authority to pass these. They weren't representing the people. So the next pretended act was for imposing taxes on us without our consent. So now, if you're just a average school-aged, child in America, and you've been going to public school your whole life, you would think that this was the only reason why we stood up against the British was what we commonly refer today as no taxation without representation. That's what this one is. Now, this is number 17, grievance number 17 out of 27. So it wasn't the first one. But it was number 17, and it's hidden among all the rest. Now, it's just as important as the rest, but it's important that we as Americans understand that it wasn't just about taxes, right? And this essentially was a condemnation of the Stamp Act of 1765. So if you recall, when we talked about the how we went from being subjects to sovereigns. We talked about during the 1760s, there was the French and Indian War, and it was essentially a carryover of the 7 Years' War in Europe, and it was just fought here in the United States. We just called it the French and Indian War, even though it was the French and Indian were fighting, but then Britain got involved, right? But because of that, and because of the war over in Europe, Britain incurred a ton of debt. And so after that war was done, they being Parliament and the King, enacted the Stamp Act of 1765, which essentially caused colonists to pay a tax every time they wanted to use some sort of official document, maybe a bill of lading, maybe a title or a deed or anything like that. Anytime you had one of these documents, you had to pay a tax or use a document. Maybe it was a flyer or a leaflet or some sort of newspaper. You had to pay a tax. And this was in order to pay back the debt for a war that the colonists really weren't involved in. It was Britain versus France to a large degree. And as the grievance says, it was enacted without the colonies being represented. They were being taxed and they had no say in it. And what made it worse was the fact that it wasn't their debt to pay, right?
That's right. So so as Jason mentioned, if you went to public school, why did we have the War of Independence? It was taxation without representation. They threw the tea into the Boston Bay. Okay, guys, part of it was taxation without representation, and taxation without representation is just one of the many representations and manifestations of tyranny. So if someone was to ask you, why did we declare independence? Why did we separate formally from England? And the answer, there's twofold answers really, is one, England did not live up to its deal. And we'll talk about that more in detail. We've talked about it before, but we'll talk about it again later. And the second is tyranny. Okay. The 27 grievances are the different manifestations of this tyranny.
Some of them, right?
Some of them, and there were many more. And Jason brought up on the last episode the prequel to the Declaration of Independence by Thomas Jefferson, and Jason rightfully described it because it was for the state of Virginia, or the colony of Virginia, I think.
Yeah,
Jason.
it was Jefferson, the summary view of the rights of British America that Thomas Jefferson wrote, and he wrote it for the delegates who were going to the First Continental Congress. So they had a sense, his sense of what was wrong with, British, exerting their control over Americans.
Yeah, it's really incredible. Personally, my favorite author of all is Thomas Jefferson, the way he writes, which is incredible. But understand that these are examples, real life examples of what tyranny looked like, which led to our nation. Now, it has many different manifestations, and we're seeing some of them today. So we're giving you examples of what we're doing to educate you, but we also want you to be able to recognize what tyranny looks like.
Yeah.
Don't acquiesce. Just don't roll over if someone has an edict here. You got to think about it. Okay.
And by the way, since we're talking about Jefferson and his essay, the summary view of the rights of British America, we actually put that up on our website at Patriot Coalition Live. It's not only is it in the show notes from episode 12, which is last episode, but it's also in the Freedom Library. So at the top of our website at patriotcoalitionlive.com, click on Freedom Library, and we're starting to assemble some critical reading. And again, that's a good one to understand. It goes even more in depth into a lot of these grievances, and as Matt put it, some very eloquent language by Thomas Jefferson.
There you go. So going to grievance number 18, for depriving us in many cases of the benefits of trial by jury. An example here is the Sugar Act of 1764, which allowed for trials to enforce the acts of Parliament regarding trade and commerce. For example, and we mentioned this in a previous episode, still applies here, previous episode regarding the Declaration of Independence. At that time, if someone made iron, in order for them to sell it, they had to ship the iron literally to England for a 3-month journey, it had to be dealt with, taxed again, and shipped back. So not only do you have to pay for the iron, you had to pay for the shipping once, twice, and for additional taxes. Okay, so obviously a tyranny and very expensive. So in this case, um, the Sugar Act allowed for trials to enforce the acts of Parliament regarding trade. So remember in previous episodes that swarms of officers were sent from England to the colonies to enforce these, pseudo laws, and they called them for pretended offenses, pretended laws. So in that case, if you went to an iron manufacturer, whether it was smelting iron, and you said, I need some for a wagon wheel. And let's say you had compassion and even you broke the law and you said, here, Johnny, here's enough for you to make 4 wagon wheels. Word gets out, the owner of that ironing manufacturing facility arrested. Person who bought the iron to make, wagon wheels to take care of his family around town, arrested. Okay. And not only would you get arrested by these swarms of officers, you were transported beyond seas, basically to England. You wouldn't get a trial by jury and you're guaranteed to be punished. Okay. We saw something like this in Hong Kong. The big hubbub over there early in 2020 was China wanted to be able to extradite anybody they wanted. And what it means is, just like we see here, okay, remember, history rhymes. They wanted to extradite anybody who was fighting against them. Here, anybody whom these swarms of officers identified as someone who wasn't towing the royal line or the parliamentary line, they are out of here, and you can guarantee they can be sent to the parliamentary gulag. Okay, tyrannies do that. They got to have a place they send their people to.
Yeah,
Okay?
it's interesting. So, if you recap, I mean, and you look at these dots that are lining up, they pass an act that says that you have to comply with certain trade and commerce rules. In other words, you have to pay money, right, in order to have the privilege of shipping stuff somewhere. They send swarms of officers to enforce that, and then get paid out of the proceeds of your money that you're having to pay for this pretended law to ship something overseas and back. And then if you're caught breaking that, then you're taken to Britain and tried without a trial. So for all for that, for something that we didn't even ask for, right? It wasn't something that we wanted.
So we were funding tyranny against ourselves. Okay.
History rhymes.
History rhymes. You hear that? You hear that? I shouldn't chuckle because it's going on today.
It is.
And you're right, Jason. I need to. Obviously, we're passionate about this, and so I alluded to the 19th grievance. Here we go. For transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offenses. Jason and I already add context to that word pretend or pretended. It's basically for bogus laws. Okay, edicts. And an edict, if it's not legal, then it's an edict or an unjust edict, which is a fake law, you could say here. Now, pretended in this context means, like I said, just laws that they made up rather than by colonial legislatures.
Yeah, they being Parliament, right? It means pretended, meaning that Parliament made the law and we didn't elect Parliament. We elected our legislatures. So that's why it's pretended.
Yeah. So, and it happens like this. The request of the king's prosecutor, trials crimes against the crown property may be held in Britain. Jason, you want to add some context to this?
Yeah. So if let's say somebody is found indicted, let's say, for a crime that for a law that Parliament passes, the crown prosecutor or the troops that are now quartered in your homes arrest somebody, or one of the swarms of officers finds it, and the troops arrest somebody. That person then, when they're indicted, the crown's prosecutor can say, you know what, because of the seriousness of this crime, we're now going to ship this person across the seas and tried in Britain. So it's very similar to the last one we read, but this one applies to another specific subset of laws besides trade and commerce. It applies to, crimes against the king's property, and essentially things that the crown, the king, deemed very very serious. But in our case, we didn't ask for these laws, and so they're pretended offenses. So these people could be shipped across the ocean at their expense, not in a jury of their peers, to be tried, and it was just basically a guilty verdict before they even stand trial.
There you go. And this, before the War of Independence took place and a Declaration of Independence, it had been going on for a decade and a half. So this didn't all happen at once. In fact, this what this context here we're giving you, and this is kind of like a tit for tat. In fact, the Continental Congress on October 14th, 1774, sent a shot across the bow of England, so to speak. They sent a warning, and which is a precursor to war. And I might add, this is an example of manly firmness, which is a phrase that was used in the Declaration of Independence. Quote, the seizing or attempting to seize any person in America, and they said it because of this, any person in America in order to transport such person beyond the sea for trial on offenses committed within the body of a country in America being against law will justly and ought to be meet with resistance and reprisal. So basically it's this, the colonies are saying, we are going to fight you. And if you attempt to, exercise these pretended laws or pretended offenses against us, we are going to act. Now, this is in 1774. The actual first shot was a year later in 1770, actually about 6 months later. So as you can see, this is an example of what was led up to it. Okay.
Yeah, it was pretty significant for, at that time, under the King of England. You could tell that they were getting fed up, because that last line of that resolution from the Continental Congress says, anytime that this happens, it ought to meet with resistance and reprisal.
Yeah, so this is the equivalent of a declaration, and they're communicating to their people and saying, get ready for war. Okay. Number 20, or rather the 20th grievance, for abolishing the free system of English laws in a neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government and enlarging the boundaries so as to render it at once an example and fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rule into these colonies. This is a long one, but what it was like this, okay? The colonies we fought north of us in Quebec, or if you're French, it's Quebec. Basically, they had already rolled over and said, whatever you say, King. Okay. And because of that, their set of laws was basically no laws, and you do exactly what the king would tell you to do. Well, you can't see me here, but imagine me holding my hand horizontally, and that would be the border between the northern portion of the colonies and Quebec. And what the Parliament arbitrarily did said, oh, we are rebordering things downward to the region, which is now Indiana, Ohio, and Illinois, essentially, taking back more land, more geography that would be under more tyranny. And
it essentially prevents the colonies from moving westward and expanding the influence of their, from the king's view, unruliness from that spreading westward, right? It's kind of cut that expansion and that influence off.
And your word, what you were, parodying, or rather saying what the king would say, and the word that Jason said is unruliness, which is a haughty word, kind of an arrogant way of saying, you little unruly, pest. And that's what the king regarded us as. We were lower than subjects. We were just tools. We were just like in the Matrix. We were just batteries. All we were are ways
resources
for the resources for the king to get money. And they treated it not even as second-class citizens, but they totally want to subject us. Okay. And this is a manifestation of what that looks like. Next, 21, for taking away our charters, establishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the forms of governments. Okay.
Sorry, real quick. So that's abolishing our most valuable laws.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. The Parliament, aka England and the King, passed the Massachusetts Government Act, nullified and then altered the Massachusetts Charter Act. The result which favored England over the colonists. Yet again and again and again, It's a fight between the king and parliament and the colonialist that's saying we are going to impose our will upon you, and we're going to take every mechanism you have, particularly the legislatures and your laws, so that you cannot have your own character, you cannot have your own laws, you cannot have your own colonies. Um, there you go. So, want to add anything to that, Jason?
Yeah, I mean, this involved, town councils would have to be appointed by the king. So no longer were they representing the constituents, not just the legislatures, but town councils would have to be appointed by the king instead of the colonists, instead of being the colonists' own representatives. And also the town council meetings, because of this, would have to be approved by the governor, which was an appointee of the king, in order to to conduct their business, right? So all roads, all authority, power, control, we would say tyranny, lead back to the king. Nothing happens without his approval, and if it does, then it's met with some sort of consequence, unjust consequence.
So that said, we would love to hear some of our audience. Where do you see similar things today? So send us an email or you can send us a message at patriotcoalitionlive.com. There is an opportunity to do that. So next, number 22, for suspending our legislatures and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever.
Yeah, you remember we talked about the Stamp Act, which was a result of the king trying to pay off debts. Well, the colonists were up in arms about this, rightly so, and they complained, they petitioned, for redress of grievances, and finally, the Parliament and the king said, okay. But there was a reason why they said okay. I mean, as you can tell, they don't really do anything unless it, as we just said, unless it gives more power or retains power for the king. Well, in this case, they said, yeah, okay, we'll repeal the Stamp Act, but as a condition, as part of the language in that act, the Repeal Act, we're going to make it so that you agree that Parliament is now your legislature, not your colonial legislatures. So it was today, it's not quite an exact analogy, but it's kind of like a poison, you would call a poison pill today. It says, okay, if you want this, you're going to have to vote for this too, and give Parliament your the authority to make laws and not your colonial legislatures.
Yeah. And I want to add a little context as to leaders out there. Obviously, military leaders, because that's what your job to do, particularly if you're NCOs and officers. But, and I'll quote John Maxwell, the first duty or responsibility of a leader is to identify reality. There are millions of people in America who have got it, who've figured out there is something awry in the state of affairs right now. And yet I find myself being surprised when I see our rights usurped, when I see tyranny making placing its tendrils into my life and our lives more every day. And at one point, you got to say to yourself, I'm not going to be surprised, and anticipate how tyranny will manifest itself. So Jason and I our call to action to you is, in your life, if you're a leader and we nominate you to take action, to identify what you think or how tyranny will manifest. And typically it's leftist forces, people that to them, in their opinion, the Constitution is a roadblock. And that's what it's supposed to be. Okay. It's not a glorious document. It's a way to prevent them to grab more power. Okay. As I acknowledge that truth as a leader, that leftists want power, they want more of it, and to retain power, like Jason just said. So what will they be willing to do?
Yeah.
And
I was just going to say, this is, this podcast and a lot of the efforts that Patriot Coalition has done over the last 16 years is about removing the plausible deniability, right? We can no longer say, if you are a rational thinking human being, you can no longer say that, oh, things are going to be okay. Things are okay. All things will pass. right? The history, the trend of these things. We're outlining the specific things that are going on in our country today that are in complete contravention to our constitutional governance. And this podcast is one of the attempts to remove that plausible deniability for you leaders who can then say, clear away all the muck, identify reality, as Matt alluded to, John Maxwell, and say, okay, if you are a man or woman of character, you have to say, I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I now know that there is a threat. I cannot just stand by and do nothing.
That's right.
Must, in order to conform with my oath, in order to honor my oath, I must take action. And that's, again, going back to our very first episode.
Yeah, and Jason has many awesome sayings. One is that we've allowed this to go on. Now, we're not primarily responsible for what's been going on. And you've also heard it said that all it takes for evil to succeed in its measures and its plans is for enough good people to do nothing. Now, in 2020, we saw a lot of good people rise that we did, like I've never seen before. I think there was a 70-mile-long caravan supporting Trump, which was amazing. Might have been 90, I don't know, but that's a lot of cars. And as just a show of solidarity and support. The problems that we're facing now with so much, and we have to stick kind of to the topic here. I have to stick to the topic, but tyranny does not sleep, therefore, nor should we patriots, okay, and we leaders. And the warfare that we fight, it's not always kinetic. From a spiritual standpoint, there are other ways it's fought. But understand, being educated, talking to your friends, and calling someone out and say, that's just not true, and do it in a way you can do it out of love, and you can do it in a way that is very tactful. But don't stand by and just accept things going on because and I'll quote from Dennis Prager, and I don't say this lightly, because Dennis Prager is a fine American, Dennis Prager, and he tells a story about there were people being loaded into railroad cars on the way to the death camps, and on the way to the gas chambers, they were thinking everything will be okay. Now, I don't say that lightly, people, because that really happened, but you got to understand, okay? Tyranny doesn't necessarily change, but it manifests differently. The single ideology in the last 100 years, from 1900 to 1999, that was most deadly was communism. Communism, socialism, leftism, they're very similar. Okay, 150 million dead. Okay, most of those dead were taken out, were killed, murdered by their own nation's leaders. And in terms of communism, it's always in the name of for your benefit, for a better nation. And if those of you who are hearing this or listen to me, challenge me. Look at history, study history, and you'll see that everything I'm saying is right. But they said these people being slaughtered, primarily Jews, it was 6 million to 10 million. It was tragedy. And I don't say that lightly, but they said everything will be okay. Don't be that person. Don't. Some said it out of hope, and you got to have hope, but don't be in that position where I'm probably going to get
hope with a plan.
Yeah, you got to have hope with the plan, and our intent is to provide you. So my intent is not to ridicule anybody for that. It's human nature, but we have to fight our lesser.
We were
nature.
all there once, right? I was there. You can blame me. I'll be the first in line. For too long, I didn't do enough, right? And that falls on me. And then at some point, the veil was lifted, and I said, okay, no more, and it's time to go to work. And so we all have to have that moment, especially if we took that oath.
Thank you. So moving on here, the 23rd, he has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. And this is the first prohibition in America. We spoke about this on a previous episode about the Declaration of Independence. It's worth repeating. This is a quote from the American Prohibitory Act of 1775. quote, all manner of the American colonies, trade and commerce is and shall be prohibited, and that any ships found trading shall become forfeited to his majesty, as if the same were the ships and effects of open enemies. Now, this wasn't an open declaration of war. It is declaration of war independently. And as we mentioned in the past, back in those days, there was
Matt, sorry, really quick. So just
Yeah.
for context, this, even though it says American Prohibitory Act of 1775, this wasn't an American act.
Yeah.
This was an act of Parliament and the King regarding America. So he is really quick. He is saying that we will treat the ships and effects of Americans as open enemies.
Yeah. So the word American on there, it means it applies to America. And there's an agreement back in those days in a monarchy. It's I as a subject will give you my taxes, I will give you my loyalty, and when called upon, I will go to war and sometimes die for you. But
all
what
of
are you
that
going to give?
Is called allegiance.
Allegiance.
Yep.
Yes. And what do you give me as the king, the monarch? You give me protection. And not only here in the first, prohibition of America, not only did he declare that he was stopping giving his protection, a de facto declaration of that, but he's doing the opposite. They're attacking America.
One step further.
One step further. What he's saying is you can either destroy it or you can seize it, meaning take it and make it yours. And you have the right to do that vis-a-vis this declaration. Okay. So what that did, that is why it shouldn't be called a war, a revolutionary war. It should be called a war of independence, because the Declaration of Independence is a natural next step. And they're putting it here for the world to see.
Yeah, the king essentially, when he withdrew his protection from us, that's why they say he has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection, meaning he declared war on our ships and waging war against us. So he takes that away. We no longer are obligated to provide our allegiance. And by that, as Matt said, de facto, we are at that point independent.
He defaulted on his agreement. Yeah. I mean, if you have a payment on a car and you default on your payments, it'll get repossessed. Well, they took back their independence. Okay. And here's a quote from John Adams. That's the John Adams. I think he was the third president. The letter to General Horatio Gates in 1776. It says, quote, "It throws 13 colonies out of the royal protection, levels all distinctions, and makes us independent in spite of our supplications and entreaties. It may be fortunate that the act of independency should come from the British Parliament rather than the American Congress." So they are trying to be good subjects. And former President Adams here is saying, listen, they're the ones who defaulted on their agreement. They're the ones who are taking themselves out of this, because what they're saying here is this is not a revolution. This is a follow-up to their abdication of their agreement.
Yeah, this is us now standing up for our newfound independence. You withdrew your protection. Okay, we're independent, but that's where now we draw the line. Now we're independent, so stay out.
And I don't know if you've ever been in this position, Jason. I'm not the person to instigate a fight, but if I have to, I'll finish it.
Sure.
I remember I don't know, middle school, high school, what was it? And I don't know, I bumped into some guy and I said, "Excuse me." And he didn't like the way I looked at him or something. And he goes, "You want to go?" I said, "Not really, but if you have to, let's do it." What they're saying here is for about a decade and a half, they're like, "We don't want to, but if you want to, we will."
Right.
And not only were they brilliant, they gave everything, but they're courageous. Think about that. If you're an American citizen, either born here or naturalized, that is your heritage. Right. That is your heritage.
Well said, sir.
I'm just all fired up, man.
Yeah. So moving on to the 24th grievance. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. Now, this doesn't require any explanation about what it's about, but I will cite some examples. So the Navigation Act of 1764, which essentially, again, this is an act of parliament. It vested captains of British vessels to legally enforce the customs laws and to seize colonial ships. That's plundering our seas, right? Let's see, April 1775 in Lexington and Concord. The shot heard round the world. He is destroying our lives. June 1775, you have the British troops who set fire to Charleston.
It's happening.
All these things are leading up to. These are, again, in previous episodes, I referenced the fact that it was, okay, the king and parliament enacted something, the colonists in defense of their own liberty were like, no, this isn't right, and we're going to not stand for it. Then the king escalates and he says, okay, then we're going to do this. And the colonists are saying, no, it's still not right. And this is not what you're going to do here. And then it continues to escalate. And these are examples of that escalation by the king, again, in contravention to his obligation of protection to us. So the 20, sorry, Matt, did you have something to add to that?
No, work it, man. Go.
So the 25th grievance that they list, he is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny, already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages and totally unworthy the head of a civilized nation. Yeah. Now, Thomas Jefferson, could you tell us really how you feel about this?
Oh, man. He is throwing. Yeah. He's like, whoo. And sidebar, you guys understand that whenever you read old writings, it takes a few minutes for your brain to kind of click and get it. Jason have been doing this now 17 years. So it took me a while to get on, but it's a story of reality. And when you realize, oh, man, these guys were serious, the founding documents will have a new life, and it'll read you. People say about some books, and it tells a story that is real, guys. It's
inspiring, and if it's not, either we're not doing our jobs, or you need a checkup from the neck up. That's one of the two, because this is some inspiring stuff. So, it's basically saying he's hiring mercenaries to come here and kill us. Well, that's true. The king hired German mercenaries to enforce martial law in 1776. This is in very early 1776, obviously before the Declaration was written. Moving on to grievance number 26. He has constrained our fellow citizens taken captain on the high seas to bear arms against their country, to become the executioners of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands. So this is describing how the king, when they do seize our ships, will take our soldiers, our sailors, our merchant marines, and they will essentially conscript them into their navy, their army, and then try to return them here to our shores to fight against us. It gets worse and worse as we go on.
To your point, okay, we'll talk about this in more detail. What is a tyrant willing to do and sacrifice? The answer is he or she will do anything. They're willing to sacrifice the lives of others by the thousands and the hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands. They are willing to do that. Okay, Jason and I will talk about that later. But a tyrant will do what a tyrant will do and can get away with.
Yeah. Now, stay tuned for more, gang. This is, I think it's only going to get better, as we start to unfold this era and what our country is made of. If you haven't ever learned this history, haven't ever learned how we were constituted and what the role of government is, this is going to be eye-opening. It's going to be amazing for you. Hopefully, inspire you to some action.
Jason, so you said something that what our country is made of. People right now are a little bit dejected, millions of them. And they need to be reminded of that, Jason, what our country is made of. On another episode, I'd like to talk about how Washington's army was easy to track in the snow. You know why? Because their men didn't have shoes. They wrapped their feet in cloth and they were bleeding. And all that the British had to do was to follow the steps of blood.
Mm.
But they stayed and they fought. Now, I'm
Yeah.
not instigating a war. We don't need to go kinetic, but you need to know
But you started this by saying the character, what America is made of, right?
what a character is made of.
Yeah.
Now, think about that. That's who we are. So when you are in a position where you're feeling dejected, remember, whether you were born in the United States or grafted in, that is your heritage. And that's what we need to call on and give ourselves courage for. And we need to encourage people from time to time. We need to encourage each other from time to time. And Jason, I'm glad that you said that that
Yeah.
is who we are.
Yeah, that courage doesn't always result in, and as Matt said, a kinetic war, which for those of you who maybe, haven't heard that term, just means one with bullets, mostly.
Thank you. Military term.
The courage doesn't always have to result in that, right? I mean, there are many steps that are open to us to pursue to restore constitutional governance before that happens. But as the Declaration says, should it come to that, we always retain that as an option. So the last grievance before the closing of the document, this is the 27th grievance. He has excited domestic insurrections among us and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers the merciless Indian savages whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. So he's basically saying that at that time, the Indians as savages didn't discriminate, they just indiscriminately killed. And he incited insurrections and the introduction of these Indians into certain areas of the colonies. So as several examples of this, the governor of Virginia, he threatened to basically free the slaves who he knew would revolt against their masters. He was going to incite that insurrection. The governors of North Carolina and South Carolina had plans to do the same. And General Gage, basically the commander-in-chief of the British forces in America, he encouraged the Indians to attack colonists. So all these things that the king is allowing to happen in order to try to suppress, oppress, and essentially keep the colonists down.
Yeah. Now, something, you guys, vocabulary changes through the generations. And here I want to give you a modern context of these words. He has excited domestic insurrectionists. You know what? They emplaced agitators. Okay, now we know them as agitators. I've said on previous episodes, Jason, I've never heard anybody describe communism as this, but communism is tyranny in a retail form.
Yeah.
And that there have been new and improved versions of communists, aka the Frankfurt School, which says you need to capture a society's culture. Okay, and that's what's been done here. Back then, I'm sorry, for example, where in history in the last 100 years has communism manifested in the terms of agitators? It has happened in Yugoslavia. It has happened in Cuba. It has happened in Russia and in dozens of other countries. They do a couple things. They divide people, a lot of different ways to do that, and they incite rebellion. They incite agitation. They incite, and like he said here, domestic insurrections. Okay, do you hear that rhyming? Do you hear that rhyming? Okay, and tyrants don't necessarily call themselves tyrants. In fact, typically they say this is for your own good. Now, the more I study this with you, brother, the more I realize the truth of what the great Ronald Reagan says. The 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." Now, he said, think about that. Whenever someone does something for you and they say they're from the government, they're usually taking something from you. And I'm learning this right now as we're doing a deep dive into the Declaration of Independence. So hopefully that revelation that Jason and I are sharing with you, you can use that to, recognize other ways that I'm here to help. You know what I mean? So
Yeah,
Anyway,
and I would say that the rhyming, again, it's history maybe doesn't repeat itself, but it certainly rhymes. And I'm going to see if I can get us kicked off the interwebs right here. So bear with me.
oh boy.
Um,
Usually I'm
so
the one
we-
going off script.
yeah, well, and it just sort of just occurred to me, and it probably should have occurred to me a lot sooner. But this comparison of the inciting insurrections and them using, General Gage using the Indians against us, right? Who can we think of in modern history who has been incited against us, right? They're not Indian savages, but I can think of groups like Antifa, or as I call them, Burn, Loot, and Murder, the BLM,
Mhm.
um, who are admittedly trained Marxists who are
Admitted.
inciting things in the United States. Back to your
Mhm.
point, and you're actually the one that made me think about this, is trying to divide people and then trying to pit
Mhm.
them against one another, right? And that's exactly what's happening. So maybe it's not repeating, but I'm hearing a pretty good, well, not a really good limerick, but a lot of rhyming going on. So,
Here we go.
anyways, that wraps up the grievances, and then we'll just move into the summary of the document.
All right. So this is now the summary of the document, or the last portion of the document, is basically 3 paragraphs. Okay. And this is the first paragraph of the last 3. In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people.
Yeah,
So,
this is essentially what I just said a couple minutes ago. Is they said we're going to press you this way. We said, oh no, you're not. They
mhm.
upped the ante, and we said, no, you're still not. This is the back and forth. We said, no, we're appealing, and then the responses weren't even cordial. And yeah, I understand where you're coming from, but this is still my decision. It's no, we're going to double down.
Mhm. Yeah. So as you can see here, I mean, obviously it's in paper that they said we're done. We are done with it. So the second paragraph at the end, nor have we been wanting in attentions to our British brethren. We have warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We have reminded
Yeah,
them of
let's
the,
stop right there, because what
okay.
they're saying is, look, we've told the Parliament in England that not only we've warned our brothers and sisters in England, hey, your Parliament is trying to exert their authority over us, and that's not right. So they're
Mhm.
basically setting the stage to say, hey, we're not just all of a sudden coming to this. We've been warning you, not just the government, but we've been warning our brothers and sisters for whom those people in Parliament are supposed to represent, that if you don't stop this, it's going to come to something bad. And we
Yeah.
told them, your Parliament is doing things wrong.
And the reason why they articulate this is so the world will know that they're good people, they're people of character, they're gentlemen. And back then, that was a big deal,
Mm-hmm.
okay, to be people of character. And this took about 15 years, okay. Moving on here, we have reminded them of the circumstances of our emigration and settled here. We have appealed to the native justice and magnanimity, and we have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations, which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. So they are basically saying we didn't want this. We wanted to continue in a relationship with the king, but they're basically saying, hey, this is not what we wanted. But if you want to, there you go.
Yeah, they're essentially, again, appealing to their brothers and sisters, the lay people in England, because again, the House of Commons, House of Lords, the Parliament is supposed to be responsive to them. So they're appealing not to the Parliament, because they've tried that as well. They're appealing to the people who are electing the Parliament, who are making these unjust acts that are being perpetrated on America. So it'd be like us, you know, yeah, I'll use Nancy Pelosi as an example. Speaker of the House, we know that she, well, I'll put it nicely. We know that she doesn't do the right thing a lot of times,
Yeah.
right? But she's not going to listen. So it would be like us appealing to the people of her district to say, hey, you've got to rein her in, or in a larger sense, to all the people of America, saying, people, you've got to rein in your elected officials. It's up to you to control them.
Jason and I were talking earlier, and I brought this up that tyranny in the last 150 years has manifested under the retail name of communism and socialism. And you mentioned Limerick, Jason. Um, Tyranny under a different name, is tyranny still the same?
Ooh,
Yeah. It just,
there you
it's a
go.
limerick. So think about that, guys. Tyranny under a different name, is tyranny still the same?
Yeah.
And now, why is that relevant now? Maybe you remember it, but but a lot of people will help you because I'm from the government, and they take something from you, but they won't identify as communist. Yet it's still a form of tyranny.
Yeah.
So remember, and obviously, you can probably tell that Jason and I, from time to time, we have these, the lights go on, and just,
Yep.
a realization comes in, and a deeper understanding of what's going on, both in the past, what went on, and what's going on today, and how it rhymes. Um, when you make that realization that this is a power grab, this is the tendril of tyranny reaching into my life. So
So don't get hung up on what it's called: communism,
yes,
socialism,
yeah.
Marxism, progressivism, Democrats. Don't get hung up on what the name is. If it's moving us towards tyranny and away from liberty, it's
Mhm.
not good, right?
In
It's
fact,
tyranny.
I'll add to that. There is no one I know better, in the last decade or so, than the Democrats and the leftists at skewing and twisting words to make good bad and bad good. And I think from now on, I'm going to start saying, I hear what you're saying, but what it sounds like you're saying is such and such. So, like Jason says here, don't pay attention to what that they name themselves, or what group they're in. Look at what they're doing.
Yep.
Sometimes even the words, they'll say one thing, but they actually mean another. Like, previously, the Parliament said, the America Justice Act. I'm not quoting it correctly,
Yeah.
but they called tyranny justice.
Administration of Justice Act.
You got to be kidding me. And that would be the beep flag. You guys know what that is? The flag. Do you guys have that out there in podcast land? We do. I saw you smile.
Yeah.
Okay, where am I now here? Okay. Okay.
They too. Yep. You got it.
They too have been deaf to the voice of justice and consanguinity. Now, justice. Obviously, we know what justice is. Not the fake word for it or their definition for it, but consanguinity. Now, consanguinity literally means with blood, and what there means is what they're meaning here is deaf to the voice of consanguinity, meaning someone who is of their own blood. This is like someone reaching out to. I'm leaning on that analogy I used previously, the child of the abusive parent. I am your child. You are my parent. I want to be your child, but you have abused me, you have beat me, and you have called it good parenting. It is not. It is
Mhm.
not.
Yeah, and again, here they're using the word "they." That pronoun is referring to the British people, not necessarily their appeal. They're talking about their appeal to the British people at this point. So they too, meaning the people, have been deaf to the voice of justice and consanguinity.
And in fact, Jason, what was the name of Jefferson's precursor to the Declaration of
Oh yeah, the
Independence?
summary view of the rights of British America.
That's a mouthful. Thank you, Jason. So that's why I show up here every week, guys, to hear what he has to say. So understand this. Jason says there were approximately 160,000 members of the body politic, the electorate, basically voters in England. At the time, this is back in the 1770s, there are about 4 million American colonialists. So think about that. And even of those 160,000 that voted, um, a very small portion of that actually drove the train. That is, whenever you have a small number of people in charge of a bigger number of people, and if they're not legally or represented, meaning if the body didn't elect that, there will be tyranny.
Yeah.
There will be tyranny. And we often say that our founding fathers were wise. They had foresight. They also had experienced people.
That's
They
right.
saw it. They had experience. So
Wisdom guided by experience.
yes, they had both,
Mm-hmm.
So next, we must therefore acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation and hold them as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war, in peace, friends. What they're saying here is we have to do what we are doing. And typically we would denounce separation, but we have to do it. And when we hold them as we hold the rest of mankind, meaning we're now separate, we are no longer subjects. We hold you. And how do we hold you? Your enemies at war, in peace, friends. What they're saying in here is, guess what? You are acting like an enemy, so you are going to be at war with us. And this is an indirect declaration of war.
Yeah, you don't get any special treatment anymore just because we are brothers and sisters. We tried this. We tried to appeal to you. The king withdrew his protection. We are now independent. So now we have to treat you like every other nation. If you're going to be hostile to us, we're going to treat you as enemies. If you want to friendly and trade with us, we'll treat you as friends.
And as you can see, there's been, first they gave the introduction, then they gave the examples. They wrap it up, and here is basically the final paragraph, which is quite an honor to read.
Drum roll, please.
We therefore, the representatives of the United States of America in General Congress, assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do, in the name and by authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do, and for the support of this declaration with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor, signed by the 56 signatories, starting with John Hancock.
Yeah, and that's exactly what they did. I mean, they did give up their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. I mean, this was an amazing display of courage, of resolve, of standing for right principles and right values. It was, it's very inspiring. By the way, that I guess I picked this up somewhere, and I'm sure maybe many of you did, but those of you who don't know, when someone says, yeah, just give me your John Hancock, the reason why they call it the John Hancock is because John Hancock's signature on the Declaration of Independence is the largest. It's really big compared to all the other signatures, and it's the first one. So it's kind of now synonymous with a signature. So that's it, gang. That is the Declaration of Independence in three parts. It's this to me is the foundation for essentially everything that we are fighting for, right? These are rights that are given to us by God, and because they are these solemn rights, and we have the solemn privilege of standing up for them, we need to fight for them as if they are these given to us by God. So. The declaration, just again to wrap up, it starts with that preamble saying, here's what we're gonna tell you about, and here's the general reason why. Then it gives us the principles of liberty in that second paragraph, and these principles of liberty, these are things like our rights are given to us by God. All men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. All these things are listed out for us. These are the things that all of our republic stands on at this point, right? Then they go on to justify both to their brothers and sisters in England and to the rest of the world why it is, what they've endured with these 27 grievances at a minimum, and what they tried to do in order to rectify them peaceably, right? That didn't work. So they're giving the justification, look, we did everything that we could possibly do in our power to try to stop this. And yet this is what he has done to us, meaning the king and then, of course, Parliament and his governors here in the colonies. So they list all those grievances, and then, and then they close out and put their signature of approval on it. The delegations do from the various colonies. And that's it. They said, okay, that's the dirt line in the sand. We are now a new nation. And so these principles that are espoused in the Declaration of Independence, these are what later will be codified in our current Constitution. So these are the principles that all those laws in the Constitution are there to protect, and then the grievances to prevent against, right? Amongst many others. So little did they know, again, at that time that they signed this document, they didn't know what the Constitution was going to be. In fact, they had a false start with the Articles of Confederation. It didn't work out as well as they thought. And true to their word in the Declaration of Independence that says that we can start over if we need to, they did. And they said, okay, we're going to get it right. And then now we have our Constitution. So stay tuned for that. We will start digging into, how our government was created and the principle, not the principles behind it, but the role of the government and how it was constructed. And we'll talk about the different branches and so forth. So we're looking forward to that. But we thank you for your attention. And as always, we appreciate our audience greatly. If you've got questions, don't forget, we'll have some show notes on our website at patriotcoalitionlive.com. It'll give you some of these quotes that we gave you, a lot of the names of the acts, links to where you can find them if you want to do further research. And we will leave it at that.
So, and hopefully this has empowered you guys and inspired you, but being a true patriot is not an event, it's a way of living. Our intent is to share our enthusiasm and commitment to being patriots for the sake of freedom, for God and country, that you do the same. Okay. So thank you, Jason. Great work today. Folks, thank you very much for joining us today. Please go to patriotcoalitionlive.com for more information, patriotcoalitionlive.com. Your monthly support is a big help to us. Subscribe to the Patriot Coalition Live wherever you get your podcasts, like Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or Google Podcasts. Please give us a 5-star rating. It does matter. Okay. If you have any questions or topics you'd like us to address, please let us know. You can send us an email there on the website. And that's it. So thanks, everyone. We'll see you here next time.
See you next time.